Hi, everybody, and welcome to Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from the Straight. It's been a huge week for the Melbourne Cup. Well, obviously, the Melbourne Cup's only a few days away now, but been in the news all week, and perhaps for the not the wrong reasons, but certainly for reasons that maybe the VRC wouldn't prefer it to be. We've got had a few issues around a key runner for the Melbourne Cup being ruled out due to vet protocols. There's been a few other questions raised about international participation in the Cup. Tim, this is an issue that never goes away year on year. It will always have a bit of a hot button effect where it involves the world's biggest stable, arguably in with Aidan O'Brien. It's Jan Burgel ruled out of the Cup, having passed a scan in the UK or overseas and then come to Australia and failed the scan. So it was certainly a point of contention this week, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I think the VRC and Racing Victoria would prefer well, you can call them negative headlines this week than next week. They just couldn't afford, as you've said elsewhere, they couldn't afford a death in the Melbourne Cup any year, but this year, and the headlines just screaming, Tuesday night, Wednesday, and going forward. So rightly or wrongly, the horse has been pulled out, and if you listen to some vets, independent vets, the right decision's been made.
Yeah, it was interesting what's probably been suggested elsewhere. Look, I would say that Coolmore and Aidan O'Brien have been as diplomatic as they probably can be. They would rather the horse run, having taken him all the way to Australia and unbeaten UK St. Ledger winner, like a serious prospect, a horse that Aidan O'Brien basically indicated he thought was a certainty for the race, given the weight and the way things have worked out. That they've been somewhat diplomatic, I suppose. Probably the diplomacy broke down when Kevin Blake, a noted pundit in Irish racing and closely associated with the Joseph O'Brien stable, came out and accused Racing Victoria of, I guess, a bit of hypocrisy here or dual standards, having one rule for the locals and one rule for the overseas. I think that's pretty unfair. I think it's been pretty clear what the protocols are. And I think over time we've seen, especially in recent time, the international horses have been the ones of concern. And I know Brian did raise this a month ago before he sent these horses out here. He said it's very hard to get these European 3-year-olds through the vet testing, through the scanning to get here. And so it may have been a case that a horse like Jan Bruegel was, I guess, marginally in when he left and then marginally out when they finally got a final look at him. And whether things have developed or whatever else, safety first. The Melbourne Cup's had a spate of deaths. The future of the race will depend upon having safe patches for these horses. And tough decisions to make, but you're better off, erring on the side of cautions in this instance, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I just wonder if Kevin, it's easy to sound off. I've done it myself, where you sound off on social media and you think that's probably wasn't the smartest thing to write or say. You just wonder in the cold light of day whether he regrets being as aggressive and controversial as he was with those opinions. Maybe he still holds them, but I just can't imagine there's any fact behind that. They're rightly to be disappointed, and Coolmore and any trainer's not going to send a horse all this way if they think there's problems. And certainly when he's passed the CT scans in Europe, they're just not going to do it. But things change. This issue's been just talked about for years, whether it's Werribee, just the different training facilities and the way they're trained, just pressure on the legs going around in a circle instead of a straight line, all those sort of things can add up to little issues. And maybe the horse probably wouldn't have broken down, but you just can't, the vets say there's an increased risk, and the Melbourne Cup and racing in Australia can't afford that.
Absolutely. Well, where do you feel the race sits at the moment, Tim? I mean, there's been discussion. Bruce McAvaney, the very noted broadcaster, spoke to Matt Stewart this week. We've got an article up in the Straight at the moment talking about where he feels that the Cup no longer stops the nation in the way that it once did and the way that it did in his youth. Richard Freeman in that article has questioned whether the internationalisation of the event, I suppose, which happened through the 90s and 2000s in the last decade, has contributed to that. I mean, where do you feel it sits in the national perspective or the national psyche, Tim?
I still think it's the number one race. My kids still talk about it, Dad, when am I going to, my son still talks about Max Dynamite running a place, and, hopefully school that my kids go-to haven't relented, and there's still the sweep. And he asked if he's allowed to watch the Melbourne Cup on Tuesday before he catches the bus home. So hopefully, and my daughter for that matter, so hopefully they can. I think, yeah, again, it's still the number one race. Yes, it mightn't be as captivating as, or the broader audience as it once was, but it's still such an important race to the industry. And, you know, and I'm sure stats will show it's the biggest wagering race in the country by a proverbial country mile. It's, yeah, yes, it's maybe harder to do the form, but you can also a lot more information available now than, you know, 25 years ago with videos and things like that. If people want to do the work, they can find the winner and have a lot of fun. And yeah, yes, it's changed, but not, you know, the argument of the good old days. Well, that's just, I still think it's a really important race. I still love it. I don't necessarily bet on Melbourne racing all the time, but I'll be having a bet on the Melbourne Cup just because we have to. That's what we do as Aussies.
Yeah, I think it's well over $200 million, the turnover on the race, which is, you know, probably 3 to 4 times higher than the second biggest race in the country. So, you know, it's important to the Australian, from a wagering perspective, is enormous. Everyone has a bet on the Melbourne Cup. I guess it has some relevance challenges, and I think Bruce McAvaney sort of has alluded to those in the article. It's still a great betting race. Whether the handicap spread, we won't get to that detail, but whether having a top weight at, you know, 55.5 or whatever it's going to be this year, and only having a sort of 5 kilo weight spread diminishes that. It's still a fantastic event in that regard, and it still sits, you know, high in the national conscious, which is why, getting back to what we initially spoke about, Tim, why it's so important to make sure the race is protected from, you know, significant, you know, bad instances of horses breaking down or it's a challenge because it's a 2-mile race. It's often on a track which is not hard, but a track which is not soft. So it is an endurance event for a lot of these horses. So it is a race which can, you know, bring on. It's a different type of race. We're not talking like, it's not a 1,200-meter race down the straight. And I think that's why it gets back to the fact you want to protect the race going forward. That's key. I feel like that, you know, that there is some challenges longer term about the relevance where it sits within the Australian context, but its broader appeal to the Australian public is still there. The voices against it are stronger than ever, and that's fine. We live in a democracy. People can have their opinion. But yeah, the Melbourne Cup still stands alone as an extraordinary race. We're looking forward to it next Tuesday.
Yeah, you can't remove all risk, but that's if you can remove as much risk as possible to injuries and fatalities and things like that. I guess social media's got a lot to do with that. Those minority voices have got a channel to spout their opinions just as the majority does as well. And that's probably why we're back and forth in a lot of these debates, I guess.
Tim, quite interesting is that we've got the biggest time of year in terms of racing in Australia, and this has always fascinated me. And you've worked in the bloodstock space longer than I have. We've got probably, 5 of the biggest 8 most influential bloodstock figures in the country all hopping on a plane and going to America this week, or end of this week, and over the Melbourne Cup time, going to the sales at in America, the mare sales at Keeneland and Fasig-Tipton. And we've also got significant trade from Australians in the Tattersalls Horse and Training Sale. We're probably looking for horses next week. We saw Gay Waterhouse's stable through Kiwi de Berg and Johnny McKeever pay the equivalent of $2.7 million for a Frankel colt, who's probably going to come out here next year and try to dominate our best stallion races. It's an interesting situation. I mean, how big are these sales? And let's start with the Keeneland sales and the Fasig-Tipton sales first, because they probably give some context to the bloodstock space, and we can move on to talk about the Tats and Trading sale in a bit.
Yes. Okay, so Fasig-Tipton and Keeneland, these are the breeding stock sales. So weanlings, brood mares and foal, all that. Sort of the equivalent of the chairman's sale for Inglis and Major Millions National Sale in May. That's sort of what we're talking, but it's a truly global sale where the Japanese, the Europeans, obviously Australians, and maybe some New Zealanders, South America, they all get there. It's the melting pot of the bloodlines that are, we talk about the outcross a lot here, with obviously Australian stud book dominated by Danehill, Sons of Danehill, Reduced Choice, and so forth. where there's the outcrosses there, but it just seems to be that the American mares for the Australians, let's talk to our audience, the Australians and Southern Hemisphere stud book, it seems to work. You know, the American mares, they're fast, they get out and run, show gate speed. I guess that's heritable in a lot of ways, and we've said we'll see it at the Coolmore on the weekend with Switzerland being out of an American mare. There's Manal, same year, obviously it's Group 1 winning, well now 3-year-old, also out of an American mare. We've had Wild Ruler, and there's countless of examples of good horses out of American mares, which when you boil it down in terms of the percentage of the makeup of the Australian stud book, it's quite potent, and that's why a lot of the breeders are going there. Henry Fields, John Muir of Milburn Creek, he's been a regular over there. There's Andrew Ferguson, Bell Rivers going over for the first time, I believe. Agents, Julian Blaxland, and so forth. So they're all going to be there. Some are going for the Breeders' Cup this weekend and already flowing out with contingent from Coolmore, Colin Santry. Maybe we'll get an invite next year, Bren.
They've waited for that invite for a while now, Tim. Haven't had it. So.
No, it hasn't come. But they're all over there because Justify's shuttle, but he's covering the Southern Hemisphere time, but he's not coming back. So they're all going to. There's mares in foal. Even yesterday, Wittenstud, who are also over there, bought a mare in foal to Justify for $180,000 US. So it is, again, it's a global market these days.
Yeah, it's a fascinating global market in that regard. And the horses in training, so we've seen the Australians absolutely dominate this week. Gay Waterhouse, Chris Waller, Kira Ma, and Annabelle Neesham, we're probably talking close to the 4 biggest stables in the country, dominating over there. But even people like Henry Dwyer buying over there, which is fascinating to see. Henry's obviously had success over in the UK this year already, but to be going to Newmarket and buying these horses, I guess off the back of what we've seen of the domination of European bred horses in our premium sort of 2,000 metre plus races, it's not surprising. I guess the other question is, Tim, is what impact that may have on investment in Australian bloodstock ongoing, and whether the threat of buying horses, tried horses effectively out of Europe at a premium price has a knock-on effect to the Australian yearling market.
It does. I guess people don't have the patience. They want the results now. I got told a story about Mike Moroney buying one overseas, and he rang out the client and said, I've bought this horse. And he said, is it racing next week? And he said, no, like Melbourne Cup next year we're aiming at. Oh, I thought it was this, I think he got the deal done, but, it's like the owner just expected immediately it's going to be on the plane and racing, the Cup colours. Even it's not that simple, but, as you touched on, even Henry Dwyer bought one, I think landed, it's about 900,000. Thanks for that email, Henry, but the reason I haven't replied. They're all chasing, the next Just Fine, Johnny McKeever that bought that horse with Delius, good form lines by Frankel for a lot of money, but, they won the Metrop with Just Fine last year, and no reason why this horse that ran in the Arc only sort of a couple of weeks ago can come out and make his presence felt in Australia, especially when you look at the success of the Frankels out here.
I guess the question around but you're buying these horses that are effectively, a lot of these horses are 3-year-old colts, Northern Hemisphere time. I can't think of too many that would have come out of that sale. Maybe Fierce Impact might be the one that's come out here and come out of sales like that and then ended up going to stud. So you would think that the investment in these horses, i.e. $2.8 million, maybe they can develop into a stud project. A lot of them end up being gelded. It's a lot of money to be paying, Tim. Do you feel like that there's a strong return on investment? It's actually just it's different than you going buying Stina for $5 million, because she was always going to have residual value as a Group 1 winning filly. Now she's obviously a Cox Plate winner, worth a lot more. But it's just an interesting one for me about spending this big money on horses, a lot of which will end up as geldings and are only going to get their value off the track.
Well, people just can you put a price on success on Melbourne Cup Day or winning a Group 1? For a lot of these people, it's a priceless investment trying to chase the ultimate Group 1 success or a big race. And this is a way of doing it. We don't breed stayers down here, and that's not going to change anytime soon or at all. I can't see it changing at the moment. There's a few stallions starting to go okay. But by and large, we're a sprinting market. That's our strength. So we go and source these stayers elsewhere, even as we touched on Henry Dwyer and trying to get a 2,000 metre horse. It's just the way it is. And yes, maybe it impacts, or it does impact on the yearling market, but there's different levels and different people want different wishes chasing the 2 and 3 year olds. If you get a good 3-year-old bought out of New Zealand, there's a lot of money to be won winning Oaks and Derbies and other races like that the international Europeans won't be contesting. So just picking your mark, I guess.
Then we'll move on now to the news you broke earlier on this week, which Militarize, the 3-time Group 1 winner that had been at stud at Newgate. Unfortunately, the stud career hasn't worked out for him. He's headed back to the racetrack. Now, it's not the first time we've seen this, but he's a significantly high-profile enough stallion to sort of warrant a bit of discussion around this. I mean, first of all, a horse like Militarize, let's look at what his future may look like. Highly probable he'll be gelded and probably brought back and raced again. We've seen horses like Militarize and do that. I mean, in terms of his profile as a horse and his ability to come back and compete at Group 1 level, what sort of, I guess, what's the chances he comes back and still wants to race? And B, what's the profile of races do you think he can sort of measure up to?
Well, time will tell, but he wasn't over-raced as a 2 and 3 year old. He was an exceptional racehorse, and it's just a shame with that being by done deal and not an outcross, but sort of different bloodlines that, you had all the credentials to be a top stallion, and then for whatever reason, there's no mismanagement or anything like that on Newgate's behalf. It's just, it's luck of the draw in a lot of ways. If you stand enough stallions, you're going to get caught out by a stallion that can't, isn't fertile enough for whatever reason. And
there are a host of reasons. There are a host of reasons why horses aren't fertile. Won't get into them too much, but we're not vets, and it's probably not. Yeah. It's probably a bit nitty gritty for a conversation like this. But it's not just that they're firing blanks, or there's physical issues. There's other things. There's psychological issues. There's all sorts of reasons why a horse may not choose to, may not be able to breed. And so it happens, as you said. The numbers stack up after a while. X amount of horses will end up, percentage amount of horses will end up unable to work at stud. And I guess the challenge is now back to Chris Waller to go, this horse he was never an overly big horse. So he has let down, as they say. So they get big and change their body shape when they go into a stallion sort of context. The challenge is now on Chris Waller to get him back to be a racehorse, I suppose.
Yeah, and there's lots of races. Wait for age, the 2,000-metre Queen Elizabeth, I think 5 million. That could be a target in the autumn. Doncasters, which he ran in this year. There's All-Star Miles, loads of races where, yes, they're not going to generate the millions in service fees, but that he's going to more than pay his way and add to his 2 million if he comes back. Like Kementari was ultra consistent when he came back, always running. He didn't win. I think he won 4 races after he came back, but he was always running slashing races generally. Unlucky, or certainly paying his way for Godolphin and raced till sort of 8 or 9. So no reason Militarize couldn't do that for those connections. Going forward.
I guess the question is Newgate don't tend to race geldings per se. China Horse Club do. They tend to race horses. I mean, is your expectation that he'll continue in Newgate's ownership, or will the ownership structure change for that horse?
I'm unsure. I'm unsure of, but he is that. Wasn't such an exceptional racehorse that they might take their chances to race on. Newgate have done that in the past. I think a horse called AIM was quite a good horse that raced on as a gelding. If he's paying his way, why not? And Chris Waller's meticulous. He'll figure him out pretty quickly whether he looks like he wants to be a racehorse again. And as I said, Henry's one of the ones that's going to Keeneland and things like that. Looking for the next horse. He'll be at the yearling sales trying to find that next stallion.
Just sort of branding off on this issue, what is interesting about this, we've had horses before that have had fertility issues that have been, I guess, managed. We talked about Extreme Choice as the most notable. Obviously, the progeny he have been exceptional, but he hasn't had that many progeny, and Newgate have sort of, I guess, worked with him because of his fertility challenges. I was thinking there was another horse as well. Minari was another horse as well I was thinking about as well, where they've sort of, you have to manage some fertility. Criterion was in my book, highly underrated racehorse that unfortunately didn't work out for him to start. He had a couple of tries and didn't work out. So I guess what is interesting about this is whatever's happened with Militarize is obviously significant enough to say he won't be able to service at stud. So therefore, he still adds value on the racetrack. And I guess that, he's a type of horse who, if they can get him back to where he's at, and Waller can work his magic, he could be the type of horse that could, as you said, compete in those top end sort of 1,600 metre, 2,000 metre races in Australia for the next few years, and continue to increase his record, because there's not too many horses out there that have won 3 Group 1s, 2 Group 1s to 2-year-old and 1 as to 3-year-old.
The other factor is, and again, just surmising or observing, is insurance comes into this as well. So they can't, I can imagine they can't claim the insurance and then still keep trying to, support him at stud or, cover a low book. So the agreement probably was if and when the insurance is all worked out, they say, insurance won't say, we'll pay you out, but you've got to geld the horse, or, there's no going back. So that my understanding is once the insurance is all sorted, he will be gelded, and that's probably part of the deal. So,
fascinating to know what that looks like. It'd be fascinating to know what that looks like. I mean, it's obviously all confidential, so it'd be interesting to get an insider's view on how that pays out. Because if you've got a horse standing at $40,000 a year, and he was due to serve 150, 200 mares a year, that's a lot of service fee money that he's not going to be generating. So it is, from an insurance point of view, obviously it's quite a sensitive issue, and perhaps the reason why that it takes a little while for these stories to come out, and people often don't comment or go on the record about these stories. But it'd be fascinating at some point to give a view about what that looks like. How do you insure a stallion? Like it's an imprecise art from in something like fertility, which is hard to determine. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's right. And insurance, equine insurance, we've got a story going up later, is, in my view, very, very expensive. It's 3 to 5%, and stallions might be higher than that, because when there is a payout, it's can be tens of millions of dollars. So they've obviously got to get that back through other farms insuring and owners insuring their horses. So it's extremely expensive, and but it's that's why you pay the insurance, because when you get something like Militarize not working out in the shed, you've got to get your money back.
Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk. Been fantastic to talk through these few topics. We'll be back next week to talk through a whole bunch of others. 3 weeks our plan to get through 3 big topics a week, and we'll be back here every week. And don't forget to check out thestraight.com.au for your racing, wagering and breeding news. We'll talk to you later.